It space is operating as a proxy for services that are not provided. And that is a really difficult thing for public space to do because it's not designed to do that. It was never intended to be utilized in some of those that spaces are being utilized. And also, in certain cases, people have no alternatives. Also, I want to acknowledge this in some small subsets of experience, because I also, unfortunately, have experienced this many times. There is a subset of personalities or of individuals who, might be seeking a more confrontational engagement with others who are just trying to occupy public challenge. But part of what will help us out of that challenge, part of the reason why, and this is proven out in cities all over the world and in different neighborhoods in different cities all over the world, that as you bring a reinvestment into an area and from one another as social animals, and there are behaviors that happen in certain spaces when a public space is essentially understood to be vacant that would not happen if those spaces were occupied. Now, that's not always true. These are not categorically true statements that I'm making. There can always be people who might choose to do something, new activation of spaces with dense occupation of housing that are not contributing to the social activation of downtown, to the liveliness of downtown during non-business hours, even during business hours. They're absolutely contributing to peat island effect in that neighborhood, and they are not participating ecologically. Because most of the parking lots were built before any parking lot standards were in place. So there's no trees, there's no shade, there's no stormwater management. Those are opportunity sites for us to be thinking about in our city center. Because as you imagine the experience of being a pedestrian in our city center, you also know that there are huge expanses when there's nothing activating the street edge that you're walking along. There might not be any trees, which is truly a tragedy in that public space, but there also might not be anything along the interior edge what would be the private realm of that experience. It's just open space or storage of vehicles. Parking is a need, absolutely, in the city center, but as we're thinking about new generations, opportunities people have for transportation options, that is going that we have to improve on with this next chapter of development. We won't do the same thing that we did in the mid-century again in downtown.
If I could just follow up with Lynn, are you disappointed at all in changes that you've seen in the neighborhoods that you would occur? Have you seen a lot of changes, and are you disappointed, or do you think they are contributing to the sense of community?
Well, of course I'm disappointed, but I also understand that change is inevitable. I like the way that the direction it's going in many places, but the Evelyn Whitaker area in my book about its origins and how it's changed through time. So I understand that. But on a purely emotional level, I have to say yes, I am. I walk through my old neighborhood fairly often and sort of try to recreate.
Disappointed, significantly indifferent, or you're really hopeful about Eugene as a particular feeling about it?
Hopeful, indifferent, disappointed.
Hopeful, indifferent, or disappointed? Okay.
Disappointed yet hopeful.
Well, yeah.
I'll be hopeful. I mean,
All right.
disappointed.
Okay. Well, that's a pretty good sign if you want to get
Downtown adjacent. Sometimes more in downtown than less. And being near Monroe Park, that is an ongoing struggle to make that space, say, clean, green, and safe. And making sure that people aren't privatizing that space. It's the need to have community, social cohesion in our community, in our neighborhoods. One thing we have is that we have a lot of people who are out and about walking and riding their bikes in our neighborhood, one of the highest percentage of regular riders in the analysis that we just done. What is distressing is that 6 stories or 4plexes or 8plexes or whatever, and it's like you're trying to save the village by destroying the village. Especially when you look at our neighborhood, we are 3 times the average density in Eugene, the city. And so it's like, why do people yell at us about wanting more density in an already dense neighborhood that has the largest stored middle housing in the entire city? So redevelopment downtown is super important. It's important to people in our neighborhood because a lot of us, the people who would spend the money to build downtown, they're like, no way, we don't want the town, but there's a lot going on, right? And I think that if we put money into those adjacent neighborhoods that are around downtown, that includes in the Riverfront neighborhood, a terrible job preserving our historic architectural legacy. There's nothing left downtown. It's been bulldozed off for parking. So if we can develop that, and especially because of our link to Lane, and look at that as a bigger sense, we've
Been
expanded.
heard because I'm leaving.
Okay. Yeah.
You covered the central Eugene, and yeah, Lynn, and probably several. Cole, but you have it's cold. We have time here, and so if you could stand it, we'll be here. And she's going to leave. I was actually going to ask and also, this is not the only brook. Doesn't live in central Eugene. Maybe you in Churchill. What do you think about the community and whether any of this will in time affect you, the changes in our landscape?
Above Churchill High School, we have a very close-knit group of neighbors. Everybody knows everybody. We're all neighborhood. I recognize that we're almost out of land and we can't build neighborhoods like that anymore, but my long-term concern is I didn't know we had such a high population of 1 or 2 family household or people with kids. I want to stay here. So what can we do long-term to make homes affordable, to go back to the smaller single-family homes or smaller on a 20-story building?
Just with generational change within our country and population is tracking to generations, that's one of the reasons why we have such a significant need for housing for what people who might be described as empty nesters or single person households, but also people who are young in their career and they're looking for that housing remainder of their lives. They want to travel, they want to visit family, they want to physical injury from yard work or just home maintenance. And so in those ways, downsizing makes a lot of sense. One of the huge challenges we have is simply a lack of those housing options for people, and also a lack of housing options that are affordable for people. I didn't mention this earlier, but the reason that we are bringing Greg Colburn to Eugene for this conversation is that he has looked at cities all across our country. And when you have a high incidence of homelessness like what exists in Eugene, it's really driven out of 2 of an average apartment relative to income. So basically that housing is unaffordable to most people, and then a very low vacancy, which creates a very brittle context for people engaging with the housing market. That's how progressive or conservative a community is, or the degree of poverty that exists within a community. There are places with much higher levels of poverty than Eugene, but with much lower percentages of people or numbers of people who are homeless. It's really those 2 variables: unaffordable housing and not nearly enough vacancy within that system. So it's a brutal game of musical chairs. And all horses are going to lose out in that game. And that might be because you experience disability. It might be because you have particular challenges within your household. It might be because you have health concerns. It might be because of income and financial resources that you have. So that's one big piece of the puzzle. And when you think about the demographic change in our community that is here and is going to continue, communities is incredibly important, because you don't want to be working on becoming an age-friendly community at the moment that it's absolutely a critical need. You want to be working on that on your way to that critical need. In the same, ideally, you're working on meeting your housing needs before you are in work, walkable neighborhoods, more housing options, greater diversity of housing options that are accessible. That's going to be really important. The other piece, what you mentioned about wanting children and family to be able to be here with you, or that people are now aware at a personal level because their own children, gainfully employed, are unable to access housing within our community, just how bad a housing crisis is and just how inaccessible housing is. Average rents are north of $1,200 a month in Eugene. When I came back to graduate school in Eugene, I thought I was paying a premium for a really nice little studio apartment with big windows in a historic building for $500 a month. And my landlord did not raise that rent for anyone who stayed on their lease. So I lived in space for 3 years. When we moved to Jefferson West Side, my now husband spaces, but that also was a very affordable housing unit. It was a little bit more, but still incredibly affordable. Be described as naturally occurring affordable housing. Very old, right? Like not fancy. We were paying student loans. We were very young professionals. I was very shortly experiencing some pretty serious medical challenges that also were a real financial burden to our household. And that kind of housing option is incredibly important to people when under pressure from other things in life. The second house that we lived in Jefferson West Side was the bungalow at the front of the lot that we lived in. And that was 1,100 square feet, a couple of degrees each. And the maximum that we were ever able to afford to pay for that housing unit was $1,100. And that was the point that we started trying to look for ways to save to buy a house within our community. $12 is the average rent. So many people, that's a completely unworkable number with the incomes that are earned here locally. So we really have a lot of work to do on housing production and housing supply, because the only places that are flattening the curve of the rising costs of housing relative to just are places that